The Empire of Japan, known as the Empire of the Rising Sun, has been one of the most powerful states on the Asia continent. And also, despite the falls throughout history, it has maintained the status of power that positions it today as the third economy in the world. However, Japan was not always the prosperous country we all know. Are you interested in learning about the history of the rise and fall of its imperial era? Alright, then stay until the end of the video. Let's revisit the imperial formation's background. Believe it or not, Japan was a poor country, completely closed off from the world, and quite backward compared to the West, until the second half of the 19th century. The monarchy existed as such, but the country was de facto governed by the Tokugawa shogunate. And what is a shogunate? Well, some describe it as a Japanese-style military dictatorship. The shogun, who was the head of the armed forces and belonged to a specific clan. In this case, the Tokugawa was the military leader who exercised power over other clans to which he would subordinate by granting them provincial or secondary powers. Something like in the European feudal era. In this system, the figure of the samurais, warriors of a military elite with some political power, stands out. For this reason, it was said that the shogun had de facto power, unlike the emperor, who was granted more of a spiritual power. But anyway, let's get to the point. No, not that one. All of this was about to change to kickstart Japan's great transformation. But first things first, overthrow the power of the Tokugawa clan. The shogun had begun to lose influence since the onset of international pressures from the United States to open up to international trade. Logically, the free market would affect the interests of the ruling clans. On the other hand, there were other domains, mainly in the south, like Satsuma and Chosu, that opted for openness and would ally with the imperial faction. In the face of increasing tensions, the Goshin War would take place, in which the imperial coalition, supported by the United Kingdom, would defeat the shogunate, thus establishing the Empire of Japan and initiating the Meiji Restoration, a period of political, social, and economic reforms following the restoration of imperial power. But before consolidating, those still loyal to the shogunate would take the island of Hokkaido and form the ephemeral Ezo Republic, where they asked the imperial forces to remain on the northern island and maintain the samurai tradition. But they were denied and would be decisively defeated in the Battle of Hakone. And from here, the reforms would begin, starting with the opening to international trade, a rapid industrialization, and the modernization of the armed forces, which included the establishment of military service. Shortly thereafter, in 1875, the annexation of the Ryukyu Islands would begin, among which Okinawa stands out, which were organized under the Kingdom of Ryukyu, which had been a vassal state of the declining Qing dynasty of China. And with this, it could be said that the current territory of Japan was already unified. But if the armed forces are restructured, then the samurai would lose relevance, wouldn't they? Exactly, which is why they would start the Satsuma Rebellion, in which, after being defeated, they would practically disappear as a social class. This could be considered as the last uprising against the new government, which was on fire. During the following decade, an educational reform was being consolidated, in which the level of illiteracy was greatly reduced, in addition to imparting the feeling of identity of a newly unified Japan. The political reforms would reach their peak in 1890 after the start of the Meiji Constitution, in which a prime minister and a democratically elected parliament would be established, in addition to granting certain freedoms. And who would pay the price for Japan's resurgence? Well, the Chinese neighbors, who would have to face the First War, Sino-Japanese, caused mainly by the influence over unstable South Korea, which was the last vassal of the Qin dynasty. The result, a clear Japanese victory that showed the decline of the Qin dynasty and the transfer of South Korea to its sphere of influence. Ah, of course, and by the way, annex the island of Taiwan, now Taiwan. The bullying of China would continue during the Boxer Rebellion, in which a group of Chinese nationalists rebelled against foreign presence, and which was quickly suppressed by the Eight-Nation Alliance. Despite Japan being the country that contributed the most in this episode, it did not gain the recognition as an emerging state that it sought in the eyes of the Western powers. The only one who would pay attention to it would be the United Kingdom, with whom it would sign an alliance. Remember this fact. This would stoke tensions with the European power in the region, Russia. To avoid conflicts, Japan had ceded Port Arthur to Russia, but now, stronger than before, it would go to retake it through an invasion, triggering the Russo-Japanese War. The result was a Japanese victory that forced Russia to withdraw from the newly occupied Manchuria, in addition to ceding Port Arthur and half of Sakhalin Island, which had been handed over in exchange for the Kuril Islands. With the defeated powers in the area, Japan would have free rein to annex South Korea in 1910 after the annexation treaty, although a South Korean government in exile would be established in Shanghai. Among other events, Emperor Yoshihito would succeed Emperor Meiji after his death. Do you remember I told you about the alliance with the United Kingdom? Well, it would become effective during World War I, in which Japan would join the Triple Entente, securing the West Pacific sea routes against the German Imperial Navy. After the war, in addition to gaining recognition as a power, it would obtain part of German New Guinea, turning it into the South Pacific Mandate, the current Northern Mariana Islands, Marshall Federated States of Micronesia, and Republic of Palau. The interwar period was characterized by new attempts to gain more influence in China. In 1915, they would launch the 21 Demands, a set of impositions on the Republic of China, of which only 13 would be fulfilled, due to the international prisons of the United Kingdom and the United States. In addition to this, after the founding of the League of Nations, the United Kingdom would reject the proposal for racial equality, leaving non-Caucasian states in inequality. Logically, Japan would be outraged by this, and the Anglo-Japanese alliance would end in 1923. In 1926, the well-known Emperor Hirohito would come to power, who would face a severe economic crisis as a result of the crack in '99, but who would continue to recover in the following decade. Hirohito would allow the increase of military influence over the government. And what can go through the minds of the military? Well, yes, expansionism. And so with nothing to lose, Japan would invade Manchuria. Yes, he was quite obsessed with China after the Mudkin incident, and supposedly seeking the liberation of the Manchu ethnicity from China. After a successful campaign, the puppet state of Manchuria would be created. Hey, but there's still a lot of territory in China, isn't there? Yes, let's take advantage of the Marco Polo Bridge incident. That's right. After this, the Second Sino-Japanese War would begin, which many claim would be the start of World War II in Asia. This war would be by far the bloodiest on the Asia front, which would include terrible episodes like the Nanking Massacre after the Japanese invasion. Japan would establish a new puppet government called the Nationalist Government of Nanking under the command of Wang Jingwei. By this time, World War II had already broken out in Europe, and in a game of alliances, Japan would sign the Tripartite Pact, allying itself with the Axis powers Germany and Italy. With this, Japan would invade French Indochina in 1940. In response to these events, the United States would cut off oil supplies to Japan, in addition to supporting China in the war. Japan's response, the well-known attack on Pearl Harbor, would coincide with the invasion of United Kingdom Netherlands and American Philippine colonies, creating new puppet states. Yes, Japan had awakened the American giant, which would halt it in China. Despite starting with major victories such as the Battle of Singapore by mid-1942, the retreat would begin following the American strategy of island hopping, in which the Allies would advance through islands not controlled by the Japanese, thus achieving successful victories such as in Midway Guadalcanal and the Gulf of Leyte. By early 1945, their allies in Europe would be defeated, while the United States would reach Japanese territory, defeating them in Iwo Jima and Okinawa. But Japan's final surrender would not occur until the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, causing hundreds of thousands of deaths and catastrophic consequences. Japan would be occupied by the Allies until 1952, and after the Treaty of San Francisco, all its colonial possessions would be handed over and South Korea would gain its independence. The great empire of the rising sun would pass into history. What do you think? If Japan had handled its foreign policy better, perhaps it would now be the leading Asia power instead of China. Don't forget to leave your comment, and if you like this video, support me with a like and subscribe to my channel. Until next time.